What if the giants of old weren't just legends? What if Goliath, the towering warrior we all know, wasn't merely a man but part of a forgotten, supernatural lineage? A lineage shrouded in mystery, defying the natural order, and rooted in a rebellion that echoes through the ages. Still, a glimpse of it in its living odor has inspired some of the most dramatic movies and television shows of the last century. Imagine standing face to face with a giant, over 9 feet tall, clad in armor so heavy it could crush an ordinary man, and wielding a spear thicker than your arm. But what if I told you Goliath wasn't alone? Who were these other giants? What dark power flowed through their veins, making them more than just men? And why were they and their entire bloodline so intent on defying God's people? To uncover the true story of Goliath and his brothers, we must peel back the layers of history and mythology, journeying into the ancient texts of the Bible. We'll step into a world where giants roamed the earth, born of mysterious unions between the sons of God and the daughters of men. What was their purpose and, more importantly, why did they strike such terror into the hearts of even the bravest warriors? But the story doesn't stop there. These weren't just towering enemies of Israel. They were symbols of a deeper, more sinister battle, one between faith and fear, light and darkness, God's plan and the forces that sought to unravel it. What secrets lie behind the Nephilim? What truth about Goliath's origins has been lost or hidden for centuries? And why does their story still hold the power to shake us today? Stay with me, because we're about to unveil the chilling history of Goliath and his brothers. This isn't just a tale of warriors and giants. This is a revelation about humanity's oldest struggles and how, through faith, even the most terrifying enemies can fall. The origins of the Nephilim. The hidden truth behind Goliath's lineage. In Genesis 6:01 verses 4, the Bible recounts a strange and chilling event. As humanity multiplied on the earth, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves. From this union came the Nephilim, giants described as mighty men of old, men of renown. But who were these sons of God, and what was their role in the creation of these giants? Scholars and theologians have long debated the identity of the sons of God. Some believe they were fallen angels, rebelling against their Creator and corrupting humanity. Others argue they were powerful human rulers who took women by force. Still others see them as spiritual beings crossing boundaries set by God. The truth may never be fully known, but one thing is clear: their actions brought chaos and devastation. The Nephilim weren't just tall, strong, or intimidating. They were symbols of rebellion. They represented a direct attempt to pollute the human lineage and derail God's promise in Genesis 3:15, where he declared that a Savior would come through the seed of a woman to crush Satan's head. Could it be that the Nephilim were part of Satan's plan to corrupt humanity beyond redemption? Can this be the same as Eye of Asparagus? Can this be true? The Nephilim are introduced during the days of Noah, a time of unparalleled wickedness. Their presence is associated with widespread corruption, violence, and the grieving of God's heart. Genesis 6:05 tells us that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. It was so severe that God decided to cleanse the earth through the flood, preserving only Noah and his family, who remained untainted. Yet the Bible tells us the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. How could this be? Some speculate that the corruption persisted through the descendants of Noah's daughters-in-law, or that fallen angels resumed their rebellion. Others point to lingering giants in Canaan, like the Anakim, Rephaim, and the people of Gath, where Goliath and his brothers emerged. Giants in Canaan. When Moses sent spies into the Promised Land, Their report was filled with fear. "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." These giants, towering and fearsome, weren't just physical threats. They represented a spiritual battle between God's people and the forces of rebellion. The Nephilim's origins reflect an unholy union, a deliberate crossing of divine boundaries. Their creation wasn't just a physical act, but a spiritual assault on God's plan for humanity. Their towering size and terrifying presence symbolized humanity's descent into pride and sin. The flood was God's response to this corruption, a divine reset to preserve his covenant. But even then, the Nephilim re-emerged, a reminder of humanity's tendency to rebel. Yet through it all, God remained faithful, guiding his people and raising up leaders like Moses, Joshua, and David to confront these threats. When David stood before Goliath, he wasn't just facing a giant warrior, he was confronting a legacy of rebellion and defiance. But David's victory wasn't through physical strength, it was through faith in the living God. The same God who had delivered his people before would do so again. Goliath, the fearsome warrior. Goliath was no ordinary man. He towered at a staggering 9 feet 9 inches, a height that defied the imagination of his contemporaries. Picture him, a massive figure clad in an impenetrable coat of scale armor, weighing 125 pounds, as heavy as a grown man. His legs were shielded with gleaming bronze greaves. His spear? It was like a tree trunk, with a tip weighing 15 pounds, sharper and deadlier than any blade the Israelites had ever seen. And if that wasn't intimidating enough, a shield-bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield so large it could cover an entire soldier. But Goliath's true weapon wasn't just his size or his gear. It was the sheer terror he inspired. Imagine the earth trembling beneath his feet as he strode into battle, his booming voice echoing across the valley, taunting the armies of Israel. For 40 days he stood as an immovable wall, daring anyone to challenge him, yet no one moved. The Israelites, frozen in fear, could only cower as he mocked not just them, but their God. Goliath wasn't merely a soldier. He was a symbol. To the Philistines, he embodied their dominance, their belief that their gods were superior to the God of Israel. His presence alone was a challenge to Israel's faith, a direct insult to the living God. Goliath's every step was a declaration: your God is powerless, your faith is meaningless. This wasn't a typical battle. Goliath proposed representative combat, a duel between champions to decide the fate of entire nations. "Choose a man to fight me," he roared. "If he kills me, we will be your servants. But if I prevail, you will serve us." It was a deadly game of pride and humiliation, and for 40 days, Goliath stood unopposed, his voice sowing doubt and despair among the Israelites. But why did Goliath exude such confidence? Was it just his size, his strength, and his armor? Or was there something more? To understand, we must look deeper into his origins. The Bible describes Goliath as a descendant of the Anakim, a race of giants tied to the Nephilim, those mysterious beings mentioned in Genesis 6:04. The Nephilim were the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, a union that defied God's natural order. They were known as mighty men of old, men of renown. But their might came with a price. They represented rebellion against God, a perversion of his creation. The Anakim were among the remnants of these giants. When the Israelites first scouted the Promised Land, they reported seeing the Anakim and said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Numbers 13:33. These giants had been driven out of Canaan by Joshua, yet pockets of their descendants remained, Goliath being one of them. Goliath was more than a physical threat. He was a spiritual enemy. His lineage represented an unbroken thread of rebellion dating back to the days before the flood. To face Goliath was to confront not only his physical might, but the spiritual corruption he embodied, a challenge that went far beyond the battlefield. For 40 days, Goliath stood in the valley, defying the God of Israel. His taunts weren't just aimed at the Israelites' courage, they were aimed at their faith. He mocked their trust in a God who, to him, seemed absent. But David saw through Goliath's arrogance. He understood that this battle wasn't about swords, spears, or shields. It was a battle of faith. "You come against me with sword and spear," David would later proclaim, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Part 72, verses 4 through 5. This moment wasn't just a physical confrontation, it was a spiritual showdown. Goliath represented fear, doubt, and rebellion. David represented faith, courage, and obedience to God. When the young shepherd stepped forward to face Goliath, he wasn't just defending his people, he was defending the honor of God himself. The brothers of Goliath, the hidden giants of the Bible. When we think of giants in the Bible, Goliath often stands alone in our minds, towering, armored, and terrifying. But did you know he had brothers? Yes, not one, not two, but 4 formidable brothers, each as fearsome and imposing as the giant who fell to David's sling. These brothers weren't ordinary men. They were warriors, deeply connected to Goliath, and possibly part of a much larger, more mysterious story. Here's the twist. One of them, as recorded in 2 Samuel 21:20, had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Imagine the sight, an enormous figure whose very presence defied human norms. But these weren't just physical anomalies. These traits symbolized something deeper, a link to a bloodline that carried the rebellious spirit of the Nephilim. The brothers of Goliath weren't merely men. They were living symbols of a terrifying truth. They represented the continuing threat of the Nephilim to God's chosen people, Israel. Each of these giants met their end in battle against David's mighty men. But their presence was a reminder of the relentless war between faith and fear. One such brother, Ishbi-Benob, was armed with a spear weighing over 300 shekels of bronze, nearly 8 pounds. This wasn't a weapon for an ordinary soldier. He wielded it with ease, a true threat to King David himself. The Bible recounts how Abishai, one of David's most trusted warriors, saved the king from Ishbi-Benob's deadly attack. Imagine the tension. David, exhausted from battle, facing imminent death. But in the moment of greatest peril, God's provision came through Abishai, reminding us that even the strongest leaders are not left alone in their darkest hour. Another brother, Sapphai, also fell in battle, slain by Sibbecai the Hushathite, one of David's elite warriors. These victories weren't just physical triumphs, they were spiritual declarations. Each time a giant fell, it was a testament to the power of faith over fear and God's ultimate sovereignty. The origins of Goliath and his brothers are shrouded in mystery, but they point to a chilling possibility. Many scholars believe they were remnants of the Nephilim, the fallen ones mentioned in Genesis 6:04. These beings, born of the unholy union between the sons of God and the daughters of men, were giants, mighty warriors, and men of renown. But wait, didn't the flood wipe out the Nephilim? It's true that God sent the flood to cleanse the earth of corruption, yet the Bible mentions that the Nephilim were present in those days and also afterward. This suggests that their lineage persisted, possibly through the descendants of Noah's family or other mysterious means. The connection between Goliath's family and the Nephilim becomes even clearer when we consider other biblical giants like Og, king of Bashan, Og was said to sleep on a bed of iron over 13 feet long. Could Goliath and his brothers be part of this same bloodline, a legacy of rebellion against God? The battle between faith and fear. Imagine being an Israelite soldier standing in the valley of Elah. The ground trembles beneath the steps of Goliath, the giant warrior who stands over 9 feet tall. His voice roars like thunder, mocking you, your people, and even your God. His armor glints in the sun, a suit of bronze that looks impenetrable. In one hand, a shield-bearer walking ahead of him. He's not just a man, he's a living fortress. How could anyone hope to defeat him? But Goliath's true weapon wasn't his size or strength, it was fear. For 40 days, morning and evening, he shouted his taunts across the valley. He didn't need to swing his sword to win. He had already won in the minds of Saul's army. His presence alone was enough to paralyze an entire nation. Goliath didn't just challenge their bodies, he challenged their faith. His words weren't just insults. They were designed to shake the Israelites' trust in their God. And it worked. Day after day, no one stepped forward. Fear had chained their hearts, and doubt had silenced their courage. But then David arrived. Why would a shepherd boy dare to face the giant that terrified an entire army? David wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even old enough to join the army. He was a young shepherd boy sent by his father to bring food to his brothers. But when he heard Goliath's blasphemous taunts, something stirred within him. Where others saw an unstoppable giant, David saw an opportunity for God's power to shine. Where others heard Goliath's mocking voice, David heard a challenge to God's name. He didn't focus on Goliath's size or weapons. Instead, he focused on one truth. The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine. David heard a call to action and a sense of what it meant to be God's people. David's perspective was radical. He wasn't relying on his own strength. He was trusting in God's promise, God's power, and God's plan. While everyone else was paralyzed by fear, David was propelled by faith. This wasn't arrogance. This was conviction. David knew the battle wasn't just about defeating Goliath. It was about proving that the God of Israel was greater than any enemy. David steps onto the battlefield with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones. No armor, no sword, just the faith of a shepherd who trusted in the Lord. Across from him, Goliath towers like a mountain. The Philistine sneers, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" But David doesn't flinch. With a voice steady and unwavering, David declares, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." End of section 36, part 3, absence. End of section 36. The tension is unbearable. The Philistines are laughing. The Israelites are holding their breath. And then David swings his sling. The stone flies through the air, guided by more than just skill. It strikes Goliath in the forehead. The giant, the unbeatable warrior, collapses face first into the dirt. Victory. But this was more than a victory for Israel. It was a victory for faith. David didn't just defeat Goliath. He shattered the power of fear and doubt that had gripped his people. Finally, their hopes for a post-colonial future were lifted by the fact their enemies had failed to stop them. Giants in Canaan, a land of fear and promise. Imagine standing on the edge of the promised land, a land God Himself has declared yours. But as you prepare to step into this inheritance, you hear the reports from scouts. The people are giants. We felt like grasshoppers in their sight. Can you feel the terror? The Israelites, freshly freed from slavery, are faced with enemies that seem invincible. These were no ordinary adversaries. They were descendants of the Anakim, towering figures known as remnants of the Nephilim. Who were these giants? The Anakim and Rephaim were said to inhabit the hills of Canaan. These were the beings who made entire armies tremble, their cities fortified and their warriors massive in size and strength. But these giants weren't just physical obstacles. They were spiritual warnings. Their presence in the land symbolized the ongoing struggle between faith in God's promises and fear of the unknown. What would you do in the face of such overwhelming odds? Would you trust God, as Joshua and Caleb did, boldly declaring, "The Lord is with us, do not be afraid of them"? Or would you shrink back, paralyzed by fear, like the rest of the Israelites? He closed the monograph by saying, "Whatever you do, I trust you will complete it justly in the sight." The giants of Canaan were not mere freaks of nature. They were living representations of rebellion against God. Their origins, tied to the mysterious Nephilim of Genesis 6:04, point to a time when humanity was so corrupted that God sent the flood to cleanse the earth. Yet somehow echoes of that corruption remained, manifesting in these towering adversaries. The Bible paints giants like Goliath and his kin as physical and spiritual challenges. Their strength and size symbolize the world's attempts to intimidate and overpower God's people. When Goliath stood on the battlefield, mocking Israel and their God, he wasn't just a warrior, he was a representation of spiritual defiance. His taunts weren't just insults, they were a direct challenge to God's sovereignty. This is why David's confrontation with Goliath was about far more than a battle between two men. It was a spiritual showdown, a moment where faith collided with fear and God's power triumphed over human arrogance. David's victory wasn't about the stone, it was about the strength of his trust in God. "The battle is the Lord's," David declared as he stood before the giant. "The generation of your sons have helped build the giant's statues." A warning for future generations, the giants we face today. But what does this story mean for us? Are giants only a thing of the past? Or do we too face spiritual giants in our lives today? Think about it. Fear, doubt, addiction, temptation, these are our giants. They loom large, casting shadows over our faith, whispering that we're not strong enough to overcome them. The story of the Nephilim and the giants of Canaan teaches us a critical lesson. No obstacle, no matter how massive, can withstand the power of God. The Israelites failed to enter the promised land the first time because they saw the giants as bigger than their God. Are we making the same mistake? Are we letting the challenges in our lives appear more powerful than the Creator of the universe? This is where faith becomes our weapon. Just as David picked up a sling and declared victory in God's name, we too must confront our giants with unwavering trust. Remember, the giants fell not because of human strength, but because of divine power. When we stand in faith, the seemingly impossible becomes possible. The Nephilim, and by extension Goliath and his brothers, weren't just physical giants. They were giants of fear, doubt, and sin. In the Bible, giants symbolize obstacles that seem insurmountable. They stand as reminders of human vulnerability and the danger of straying from God. Goliath embodied pride, arrogance, and defiance, qualities that often lead humanity away from God. His towering presence wasn't just a test of Israel's strength, it was a test of their faith. When David faced Goliath, he wasn't just defeating a man, he was standing against the forces of fear and rebellion that had plagued humanity since the fall. Think about the giants in your own life. What fears or doubts feel too big to overcome? Like David, we are called to face these giants with unwavering trust in God. The Lord does not shine in the darkness. He will shine in the light. Goliath wasn't the only giant in the Bible. His brothers, Lami, Ishbi-benob, and others mentioned in 2 Samuel 21 carried on the same legacy of defiance. One of them is even described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, emphasizing their otherworldly nature. These brothers fought fiercely, yet each fell at the hands of David's mighty men. Why? Because no matter how strong or intimidating the enemy may seem, God's power is greater. These victories remind us that God's plan is unstoppable, even when the opposition appears overwhelming. Goliath and his brothers may have fallen, but the spirit of rebellion they represent lives on. Today, we still face giants, temptations, fears, and challenges that seem impossible to defeat. The story of David and Goliath teaches us that victory doesn't come from physical strength or worldly power. It comes from faith in God. When David stood before Goliath, he declared, "You come to me with a sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." This is the heart of the story. Trust in God's power over any earthly force. David's victory over Goliath is not just a story of courage, it's a testament to the power of faith. When the Israelite army trembled, paralyzed by fear, David stood firm, declaring, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 37. But what about us? Don't we often face our own giants, overwhelming challenges, crippling fears, or moments when the odds feel stacked against us? David reminds us that it's not about the size of the obstacle. It's about the size of our faith. With God by our side, no giant is too big to fall. How did David, a boy with no battle experience, defeat a seasoned warrior like Goliath? Was it just a lucky shot? Or was there something much greater at work? This is where we see the undeniable sovereignty of God. Goliath wasn't just an enemy of Israel. He was a symbol of defiance against God himself. David's words before the battle reveal this. "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45. It wasn't the sling that brought Goliath down. It was God. Through David, God demonstrated his power to deliver his people, not by human strength, but by divine will. In our lives, the message is clear. No matter how overwhelming the opposition may seem, no force can stand against God's plan. His will is final, and his promises are unbreakable. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 7, "As the colorless tattoo of a silver god-like sun, glinting on the man's forehead." David's victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a beacon of hope for an entire nation. His faith inspired others to believe, to act, and to trust in God's power. If David hadn't stepped forward, how long would Israel have cowered in fear? David's courage set a chain reaction in motion. His victory over Goliath emboldened his fellow Israelites to rise up and defeat the Philistines. This legacy of courage speaks to us today. Our battles, our victories, are not just for us. They can inspire those around us. When we stand firm in faith, we show others what's possible through God. The bigger picture, God's plan for you. Here's the most incredible part. David's story wasn't just about one battle. It was part of a much greater plan. Through his lineage would come Jesus Christ, the ultimate giant slayer, who defeated sin and death once and for all. Your story is part of a bigger plan, too. The challenges you face are not random. They are opportunities for God to show his glory through you. Like David, you might feel small, unqualified, or outmatched. But remember this: God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Imagine the giants you face in your own life. They may not stand 9 feet tall or wield a spear like a weaver's beam, but their presence is just as intimidating. Perhaps your giants come in the form of overwhelming fear, financial struggles, broken relationships, or spiritual doubt. Like Goliath, they taunt you, reminding you of your weaknesses and challenging your faith. But here's the truth. Just as David stood firm with faith in the living God, so can you. David didn't face Goliath relying on his own strength. He trusted in the Lord to deliver him. And that's the lesson for us. The giants we face today, fear, temptation, despair, are not battles we fight alone. They are opportunities for God to show His power in our lives. The story of Goliath isn't just a tale of ancient courage. It's a reminder that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. When we let go of our fear and put our trust in Him, even the mightiest adversaries will fall. Let's remember what David said as he faced Goliath. "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." Those are not the words of a man focused on his own abilities. They are the words of someone completely surrendered to God's power. What would happen if you faced your own challenges with the same faith? What if, instead of looking at the size of your problems, you looked at the greatness of God? David's victory wasn't about his skill with a sling. It was about his unshakable belief that God was with him. Take a moment to reflect. What are you putting your faith in today? Your own strength or God's infinite power? Goliath and his brothers may be gone, but the lessons of their story live on. These tales are not just ancient history. They are filled with profound spiritual truths that can guide us today. If you've ever wondered what deeper meaning lies behind these biblical accounts, now is the time to explore. The Bible is full of stories like David's, where ordinary people with extraordinary faith change the course of history. Each story carries a message, a lesson, a calling. Dive into these stories, not just to learn about the past, but to equip yourself for the battles you face in the present. If you've found encouragement in David's story, imagine what other treasures await you in the Bible's rich history. Comment below. What challenges are you facing today? Let's talk about how faith can help you overcome them. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder of God's power. We've explored the mystery of Goliath and his brothers, their origins in the Nephilim, and the spiritual battles they represent. These weren't just physical giants. They were manifestations of fear, doubt, and rebellion against God. Yet time and again, faith prevailed. David's victory wasn't just a historical event. It was a testament to the power of trusting in God. Just as David faced his giants with courage and faith, we are called to do the same in our lives. No challenge is too great for God, and no enemy is too powerful when we trust in Him. No matter how daunting the giants in your life may seem, with faith as strong as David's, even the mightiest enemies will fall. This story isn't just about David or Goliath. It's about the God who fights for us, the God who is greater than any fear, any doubt, any challenge. What would your life look like if you faced every obstacle with David's confidence in God? It was one book that sat on my shelf for about a year. You are not alone in your battles. Just as God was with David on the battlefield, He is with you today. Trust Him. Step forward in faith and watch your giants fall. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more insights into the mysteries of the Bible. The Bible prophet Peter said, "Tell us in the comments, what giant are you facing right now? How can we pray for you? Let's build a community of faith together, one where no one fights their battles alone."